Welcome back to another episode of Life Advice You Do Not Hear in Church. And today we are busting some sex myths. Woo!
Someone is energized about this.
I love talking about sex, as you guys know, especially when it's like, no, these things are not true and they will hurt your marriage. And let's talk about these 5 things. By the way, I'm Tiffany. If you're new here, this is my husband, James. And our daughter, Ellie, is playing quietly in the background, but she may get very loud like a pterodactyl. And if she does, you'll know where the noise is coming from.
Yes. She also may make an appearance in this video. Don't be weirded out. We're very sure she
does
really
not
only knows.
understand.
Yeah. 7 months old. She knows about food and walks outside. That's it.
That's it. So myth number 1 is you have to have sex on your wedding night.
Yeah, it's really better to think of getting married as a green light to start doing whatever you want sexually with your new spouse. I remember reading in some traditions, I think maybe in India, the newly married couple doesn't have sex until night 3. They're not allowed to. They're supposed to take the first 2 nights to explore each other's bodies. And I think it's very special to take it slow. You know, it's a conversation you want to have.
Right.
Talk about it.
Don't put that pressure on yourselves. You don't have to live up to anyone's expectations. This is your wedding night. And it's a green light, but it's not a race.
And I think that hits on why this is a myth and why this is an important thing to let go of, is it puts unnecessary pressure on you.
Yes. By the way, if you're wondering what to expect with your wedding night, we have a whole course, a video series of us breaking it down for you. It's like the sex talk you never had, but you always wanted, at least if you're like us. So check that out, linked in the description below, the wedding night talks. Myth number 2, you have to have sex anytime the other person wants it. This comes from an idea, you know, Paul talks about like your body is not your own, like, and it's true, your body is not your own, but we only think about that as far as who has the higher sex drive. So like the other person has to always give in. It's like a dictatorship to whoever has the higher sex drive. That is not a loving marriage. That is not acting like your body is not your own. That is acting like one person always gets their way. And that, in the long run, can lead to bitterness and resentment and much less enjoyment of sex for the other person.
Yeah, and like that's not just true for sex. That would be unhealthy if it was about going out to eat.
Right. One person always getting their way.
Or going on vacation. Like this idea of dialogue and sacrifice is really important to bring into sex. So we do talk about this more in the wedding night talks, but in general, it's so important for you to get past this idea that just because you compromise or just because you negotiate doesn't mean you don't love the other person. Like negotiating and compromising in love is part of having a loving marriage relationship.
And keeping a healthy relationship. Because you're in this for the long haul. This isn't like a 1-week thing where you got to impress the other person. Like you're in it for the long haul.
This isn't camp. Number 3 is that sex is really for the man. That it's something that men really like and ladies are like, I guess we have to do this. What does that subtly say to women, do you think, this myth?
That sex isn't enjoyable. That you're not going to want it, you're not going to like it. And if you have that in your head, it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy and you're going to like it less and want it less. But if you have this idea like this is for both of us, and also if it's just for the man, then like your job in sex is to fulfill his needs. It's all about him. And if you're thinking that way, you're never going to learn about your needs and what you enjoy. And so it can be really damaging on you having an enjoyable sex life down the road.
And ultimately less enjoyable for your husband too. Because I think if you were to poll most guys in an honest moment, most would agree they would rather have sex with someone who really wants to have sex and is enjoying sex than someone who's just available at any time, but is like, I guess we can have
going through the motions. Yeah. And it's okay if that happens every so often, but like, you don't want that to be what your sex life is. You want to learn, women, what works for you. And it also makes women feel guilty or like something's wrong with them if they're the ones who want sex more in a relationship. I know I've talked with women who are like, what is wrong with me? Like, why doesn't my husband want sex as much as I do? Is there a problem in our marriage? And it's like, no, that's just your dynamic. And that's totally normal and okay. And lots of women have that happen. So we just have to get rid of this myth that like it's for the man. It's not, okay? It's for both of you. Myth number 4 is one I really believed before we got married, which is if you have sex, it will keep your husband from slipping up. It will keep him from looking at other women or looking at porn or lusting. And it kind of like puts his I don't know, for lack of a better word, his purity on me as my responsibility. That is a heavy load to carry, and one that I was never meant to carry. And honestly, I think it actually leads to worse sex. There's this really interesting book, which is also linked in the description below, The
Very
Great
interesting
Sex
book.
Rescue by Sheila Gregory. It is terrific. And they have done surveys and polls of 20,000 women, and they found that the more a woman thought she was responsible for her husband's sexual purity, quote unquote, like the worse their sex life became, the less frequently she orgasmed, the less frequently she wanted sex, and the more she had pain associated with having sex, like the more it physically hurt her body. And
really interesting, because I think a lot of times you take these different myths on the surface and you might say, well, it's kind of incomplete, or yeah, I guess I could see how that's wrong. But once you read about what people think and how it affected them again and again and again, you start to think, maybe saying this at all is not really helpful the way that we thought it was. And I think most guys in an honest moment would agree that's probably a pretty minor factor in your sort of purity and thought life.
yeah, can you tell us more about that? Like, that's so opposite what we've heard in church.
Well, because I mean, what you think about as a guy, what you spend your time looking at, not what you happen to notice at the mall or at the beach, but what you spend your time thinking about is largely up to you. And purity is really about what's going on with your mind. It's not what's going on in your groin. Like, that's just... It's two different things.
Ellie is going to make an appearance. You're welcome. Hope you still hear the fifth myth, because I know
she
it's hard
just
to
really
focus
wanted
on
to be in the
anything
video.
but her face. The cute face. So, myth number 5, fifth and final, is that if you have sex before marriage, your sex life after marriage and your marriage itself will be less than it would have been. Forever, yeah. And I don't even know where we get this idea from, because the whole message of the Bible and the gospel is that, like, God redeems everything, and that there's healing, and that we're all broken in different ways, and we all can be healed, and it doesn't mean we're less than. So I'm not sure where this comes from. But I want to say, like, am I so thankful James and I waited to save sex for marriage? Yes, I am. Was it special to be together on our wedding night? Yes, we also did not have sex on our wedding night. Side note. But if we had sex, would that have meant that we had a bad marriage? No. I feel like our church culture is obsessed with virginity. It's made it into like this idol almost. Like, we're like thinking like virginity is going to get us what we want, which is a good marriage and a great sex life. No, a good marriage and a great sex life has very little to do with whether or not you already had sex, and a lot to do with learning how to love the other, how to listen, how to communicate, how to figure it out together, the two of you.
I guess the way that I would say it is, there is no way to avoid bringing brokenness into your marriage.
Right.
We are all broken people. Just because you don't have sex before you get married doesn't mean you don't have any brokenness.
And as you work through that together, it can be part of your journey to knowing and loving each other better. So, okay, we love you guys. Check out the Wedding Night Talks and that book in the description below. And we'll see you next week. Actually, we'll see you Friday for our first podcast episode. Woohoo! Bye.